Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today we've got Katrina Glogowski. She is an angel investor and attorney in Seattle. We also have Robert Laurie. He's with Ad Lucem. He's an attorney in Vancouver, BC. Appreciate you both being on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so I kind of wanted to talk to you guys. We're going to be talking a little bit later on today about some psychedelics, about is that psilocybins? What exactly are you guys going to be discussing? What's going on?
All the above, potentially. I mean, we're at this interesting period of time where, well, the rollout and the legalization of cannabis at the various state levels and federal levels in Canada, you know, this didn't lead to the sky falling. And let's face it, we're in the middle of a public health and public safety crisis, in the middle of an opioid epidemic, due to decades of pharma companies and doctors prescribing, and so that leads us into a time and a place where psychedelics and these natural plant medicines are going to enable us to deal with some of those public health and public safety issues, opioids and getting people off harder drugs, and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, for example, for depression, anxiety, and even like DMT for smoking cessation. And it's truly a brave new world. But where does that lead to in terms of an industry and so
There's
on?
Three professionals here, so we're not talking about LSD.
LSD too.
Right, but not a high dose. I guess the microdose equivalent for daytime depression with psilocybins. So that's an ongoing thing. We talked with Dr. Allison Drayson with the Ames Institute. She's heavily involved with that. So there's multiple ways, I guess, you could reset depression and anxiety. There's all of these things from LSD to mushrooms and so forth. So
there's so many applications, and I mean, again, there's so much happening in terms of legal research. And with Johns Hopkins University this past year, effectively opening the first psychedelic institution is really quite groundbreaking. And I mean, I think what we're seeing is that cannabis was about 25 years in the making, from the start of the early court cases and the medical access leading up to Canadian legalization. But we're seeing things happen in psychedelics at a lot faster pace. So what may have taken 25 years in Canada with cannabis may take 5 to 10 with psychedelics. I mean, things are moving that fast. And again, against the backdrop of over prescriptions, opioid deaths, and the like, it's effectively, these are public health and public safety initiatives that governments are looking at, local governments are looking at as attractive.
by comparison, we're looking at the CBD market, according to Brightfield Group, generating $600 million in U.S. sales last year, with revenues of $24 billion by 2023. So if you guys are saying that there's a faster growth with psychedelics, what does that market look like?
Well, today the market is fairly small because we have not seen psilocybin legalization. We have seen psilocybin decriminalization by municipalities, primarily Denver and San Francisco or Sacramento. Oakland, one of those places, or all, I don't recall, going by memory. But at the same time, you can grow this at home, just like cannabis. And we haven't really seen the cannabis market explode the way that it was predicted. Sales are off the charts, but I don't know that the psychedelic market will in fact blow up like the CBD market. CBD is a little bit harder to get at home when you can just grow some mushrooms and you can just grow some cannabis. But at the same time, it's an exciting area. And I have been speaking with folks out of California that are doing psilocybin teas and psilocybin grow kits so that you can do this at home. Again, this is not someone who wants to be proverbially tripping all day. This is microdosing to treat medical conditions. And I think you'll see legalization slash decriminalization roll out very similar to cannabis. It's already happening.
Are there other regions that are leading the way? When I was in Japan, as early as '99, you could buy it on the street. I don't know if it was legal or even decriminalized, but according to the court of public opinion, it was legal as far as everyone knew.
Which was?
This is in Tokyo.
Japan is some of the strictest drug laws in the world. I mean, that would surprise me.
Hashish was really hard to find. I had to buy it from the black market. Mushrooms, however, you could just go right on the open street and buy it.
Yeah. No, you definitely. I mean, that's new. I hadn't heard that. But here's the thing. I mean, none of this is new, right? I mean, they talk about psychedelics. There's a vibrant black market. There's practitioners. There's people that are providing psychedelic therapy. I mean, this goes back like decades. And effectively, it's sort of like the tale of two cities. There's what's going on in the one market and what's going on in the other. And the two really aren't meeting at the moment. And effectively, I think what you're going to end up seeing is trying to take what's currently off-grid on-grid. And folks don't really know what that looks like or how that will translate. Now, the difference, of course, is let's take a step back and look at it in terms of, are we talking about medical access to, say, psychedelics or recreational access? I think we're going to see medical access for sure within the 5 to 10 years, but I don't necessarily think we're going to have a recreational rollout, if that makes sense. Because really at the moment, why we have the decriminalization efforts has effectively been due to diverting folks out of the criminal justice system. At the end of the day, it's mushrooms, right? Now, unless you're pulled over with a rig full of it and it's clear that you're doing more than just microdosing, fine. But, you know, in Canada, a statistic I'll throw out, back in the old days, they'd say out of the total Department of Justice enforcement budget of $500 million, 400 of that was for cannabis. Well, now cannabis isn't necessarily the same enforcement priority it was, but I still think that's where you're going to now see police unions and other groups making a case for why they need more resources so they can go after these illicit substances, which actually I think are the only thing that are keeping us from further proliferation downward in this public health crisis that we're in. But as to, you know, when you talk about decrim in Denver and these places, I mean, all that means that if you're pulled over and you've got some mushrooms on you in a certain amount, you're just not going to be, you'll be diverted out of the criminal justice system. But that doesn't say, you know, anything about where, you know, if you wanted to microdose or macrodose, where would you get something legally? And I mean, of course, that's the other risk, that if you're going around trying to buy black market anything, that puts you potentially, you know, up for other ramifications, arrest, civil forfeiture, any number of concerns. So I don't know, I think something has to be done, or else people are going to be in an untenable situation where they could putting themselves at further harm.
So how's this going to roll out, and when? Is this going to be somewhere you can just go and buy that tea or a brownie? Is it going to be at a medical bed and breakfast? What's the rollout, and how do you envision that looking?
I envision the rollout being very similar to that of cannabis. It's going to be slow. Definitely it's going to start on the medical level. They're going to find out that babies didn't die and soccer moms didn't crash into light poles. So, okay, now it can go recreational. And where are they going to sell it? It would make sense to just model the existing cannabis concept and have it in licensed stores. You're going to sell mushrooms next to cannabis. I don't know the answer to that one, but I expect, at least in Washington, there's a lot of talk of legalizing mushrooms in Washington already. So I would suspect that they'd at least use cannabis as a model.
Well, traditionally in Canada, as the US, it seems that the state and provincial and federal regulators in Canada just effectively used alcohol, right? Alcohol as the precedent for drafting much of the cannabis rules and distribution in Canada. But, you know, that brings an interesting, the question of, people don't want, there's been a big outcry about alcohol and cannabis being sold together, because of course a lot of folks use cannabis to get off alcohol. But again, do you want to be having everything under one roof. I mean, I think it'd be great, but you also have to look at, cannabis is relatively benevolent and routine and what's the word I'm looking for? Forgiving with respect to what the user will encounter. But a psychedelic, too much of something, you could really be putting yourself at harm's way. And I mean, what's the worst that would happen with a bit of cannabis? Maybe you green out, fall asleep, feel a little bit nervous or uncomfortable. But, you take too much of something that you're not sure how your body's going to react to it. And you end up you don't adhere to the proper setting and intention, which is very important when taking psychedelic medicines. Set being the, state of mind, setting, well, where are you doing it? And somewhere where will be able to focus on what you're doing and intention. Are you doing this just to get messed up and escape, responsibilities, or is it with a purpose? And so effectively, getting those elements right will be very difficult in a rec setting without being able to create that environments where folks can do this. Because I know from personal experience from the, from psychedelic therapies involving the Johns Hopkins playlist, the psilocybin, I mean, you're under for like 5.5, 6 hours where, you need to be in an environment where your safety and security and your comfort is paramount. And integration is so important in psychedelic medicines. I was with Dennis McKenna in Peru this time last year, and we had 3 ayahuasca ceremonies when we were down there. And, when you're doing this type of medicine, you don't want to be then on the cell phone checking emails and calling people. I mean, it's a very unique space. And so without addressing setting and intention and just having things available without people knowing what to do or how to do it with the guided, I think could have some serious implications. I mean, you worry about people smoking weed driving. That is nothing compared to, 5-MeO DMT.
So last question before we wrap this up. How is that going to affect brands and businesses if it's so easy to take more than the prescribed amount? We've seen not psychosis. We've seen issues with cannabis edibles where there was an individual on a roof, fell off the roof and was impaled on a fence and died.
Well, but stupidity
is with anything, whether it's opioids or otherwise. So I guess from the legality standpoint, where do you guys see the potential for insurance and coverage covering these brands and these licenses? Is it going to be normalized, or is it going to be more scrutinized?
Where to begin there?
Yeah, that's a
we've got
very loaded question. I'll be quick. I think it's going to go 2 different directions. First, I think you're going to see it in a therapeutic setting and a doctor's office type situation, very clinical, but that is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And the second, you might end up with Josh's favorite thing, consumption lounges, where you're with folks who are participating in this process with you, either with supervision or someone who's gone through it before. And we've talked about consumption lounges being pretty much a requirement. So
you're going to see those very soon in Canada. And in fact, MAPS has a designation called a psychedelic supervisor, which is, again, they're looking to get the credentials. So that is actually a designation, to effectively facilitate access and treatments to this. But all those things that you mentioned is way too early. Insurance and rules, regs, product liability litigation. I mean, one step at a time. I mean, the all of those things will have to be addressed. But will they be addressed in manners similar to alcohol and tobacco and cannabis? Yet to be seen. But we're still light years ahead, I think, before Lloyd's of London and Hiscox is underwriting these medicines. But again, if the government doesn't regulate this and do this in a way where they have a grip on it, well, the black market will just take over and people will do it anyway. And as they've seen in Canada with cannabis, it's a lot harder to get the genie back in the lamp. But just last note, when you talk about people that do silly things when they have a psychedelic or they have too much edibles, well, if you think you can fly, then why don't you try taking off from the ground first, right? That's what Bill Hicks, the comedian, always used to joke about. Hey, if you think you could fly, well, why don't you take off from the ground instead of jumping out the window? And I mean, that's at the end of the day, I think, again, the scare tactics and just like a lot of bad information. But I mean, that's what will happen if the rollout is done in a loose fashion where you're setting people up to fail, or you're setting up people and putting them in harm's way. And I think, yeah, it's going to be fun. That's why I'm a lawyer in this space. And yeah, one to watch.
You're going to have to come back to the Talking Hedge and find out what happens next. I want to thank my guest. We have Katrina Glogowski. She is an angel investor and attorney in Seattle. Robert Laurie, he's with Adlusum. That's a law firm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Thank you both for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't.